what you're entitled to, a quarter of it.
I don't think that there's really any need for protection. Don't you think that we have each other's backs as far as that goes?
No, I really don't. I would just make sure that what you're getting is fair.
For over a decade, the world sat and watched as this family presented themselves as something rare, unusual, perhaps even inspiring, a modern-day testament to faith and togetherness. And we were led to believe it was all about love, loyalty, and unity. A single family bound not merely by blood or contract, but by shared sacrifice and shared destiny. Yet, as we now know, behind the smiling facades and staged moments of harmony lay a web of secrecy so intricate and so audacious that it has shaken not only the credibility of the individuals involved, but also the very foundation of the image they worked tirelessly to project. For this is not merely the tale of marital discord or romantic jealousy. It is not simply another episode in the ongoing saga of sister wives. No, it is something far more sinister. A story of a calculated financial scheme. A heist carried out not with masks and weapons, but with legal papers and corporate structures. Orchestrated quietly and methodically from within the heart of the family itself. And tonight, as we peel back the layers, as we sift through the documents, the testimonies, and the whispers, we uncover how millions that were meant to sustain 18 lives, 4 households, and the dreams of 13 older children were redirected into the pockets of 2 people, Cody and Robin Brown, who cloaked their actions in the language of duty and faith whilst allegedly constructing a fortress of wealth around themselves and their 5 children, leaving the rest to shoulder the burdens of poverty, sacrifice, and heartbreak. And the extraordinary truth is that this betrayal was hidden in plain sight, woven into the very name of the secret company, an acronym formed from the initials of their select children, Dayton, Aurora, Brianna, Solomon, Ariella, together with their own, Robin and Cody, a logo that may once have looked like nothing more than a quirky family reference, but which, when laid bare in court, became Exhibit A in a multi-million-dollar conspiracy case, the very proof that what we thought was shared was in fact siphoned, that what was meant to lift an entire family became instead the cornerstone of exclusivity, of privilege, of betrayal. And if you think this is simply a narrative spun from gossip or bitterness, consider this. For what you are about to hear comes not from idle speculation, but from months of careful investigation, from insider reports, from leaked financial records, from legal minds who have analyzed the structures, and from the voices of those who lived through the deception. And once you know what we now know, you will never look at this family, or indeed at the idea of shared sacrifice, the same way again. Because before the story of corporate trickery and financial smokescreens can be understood, one must first understand the sacred doctrine upon which the Brown family built its empire, the doctrine of the family pot, a principle established back in Lehi, Utah, when Cody first gathered his wives and declared that they were one, that all their incomes, whether from his work or from Mary's, Janelle's, or Christine's, would be placed into a single shared pool from which all would draw equally. And it was this doctrine, more than anything else, that sustained them, gave them identity, and indeed gave them credibility in the eyes of their followers. Because here was a family living not for the individual, but for the collective. A family where sacrifice was not only expected, but glorified. And for years it appeared to work, with Janelle, ever the numbers woman, contributing stability and professionalism from her career in accounting, Mary and Christine contributing both income and care, and together raising 13 children under the solemn promise that every sacrifice they made was for the collective good. And when the cameras arrived in 2010, when Sister Wives first aired, it was this doctrine that was tested. For suddenly money was not only coming in through jobs, but through television. And the amounts were substantial. And yet by all accounts, the family maintained its principle, pooling the money to fund the move to Las Vegas, to purchase 4 homes in a cul-de-sac, to pay for weddings, cars, university fees, and everyday needs. And those who worked alongside them recall how convincing the illusion was. One former production assistant, whom we will call John, explained how Cody would receive checks from the network and make a performance of it, gathering the family, talking of our money and our future, reinforcing the sense that they were one. And whilst there were squabbles and differences of opinion, no one doubted that the income belonged to them all, that they were, despite strains, united in finance as in family. And it is precisely because of this long history of shared sacrifice that the revelation of the corporate betrayal cuts so deeply, because what would once have been deemed utterly unthinkable, a complete violation of everything they claimed to stand for, is what in fact came to pass. Not amidst the glamour of Las Vegas, but in the red dirt of Flagstaff, Arizona, during the ill-fated move to Coyote Pass, where Cody spun his dream of one great house, or at least 4 homes united on a sprawling property. A dream sold as paradise, but one that quickly turned to financial hell. For in order to purchase this land, the family liquidated their Las Vegas assets, pouring life savings into acres of undeveloped soil, taking on heavy mortgages and rental obligations, struggling under the weight of loans, and almost immediately the cracks appeared, as cost of living soared and debts mounted. And Janelle, ever candid, described the period as drowning, juggling rent on one house, a mortgage on another unsold house, and contributions for the land, while Christine struggled to fund her daughter Ysabel's back surgery. And yet, throughout this struggle, they were told again and again that the family was broke, that frugality was essential, that building must wait, and they believed it, because they felt the squeeze. They saw the bills and they trusted Cody. But whilst Janelle was reducing herself to life in an RV to save money, whilst Christine was selling goods online and pleading for donations to pay for surgery, behind closed doors, Cody and Robin were quietly creating something entirely different, a private financial vehicle that would bypass the family pot altogether. And on 13th August 2018, mere months after the purchase of Coyote Pass, while the family was enduring its darkest financial struggle, Cody and Robin incorporated a company, not a trust, not a partnership that included all 4 wives, but an LLC with only 2 members themselves. And they christened it with the name Dabsark, embedding their children into the brand whilst erasing the others. And herein lies the heart of the conspiracy, because by directing income into an LLC where only they were members, they constructed not only a corporate shield to separate personal assets from liabilities, but also a veil through which income could be rerouted away from the collective and into their private control. And if the contracts with the television network were amended, as sources allege, to pay this new entity directly, then Mary, Janelle, and Christine had no legal claim to the funds. And the simple yet devastatingly effective truth is that from that moment, the river of money that had flowed to sustain them all was diverted into a private reservoir held under lock and key by Cody and Robin. And the brilliance of the move lay in its simplicity. For to the network it appeared a standard request, talent often using loan-out corporations. And Cody, as patriarch and primary figure, had the authority to make the change without informing every wife. And thus, with a single stroke of paperwork, the family pot was not merely bypassed but obliterated, though the wives would not know for years, living instead with the constant refrain that they were broke, whilst unable to reconcile that with the knowledge that ratings were stable and contracts strong. And indeed, in a deposition, Janelle later expressed her bewilderment, recounting how she asked repeatedly why the income no longer matched expectations, only to be met with anger, evasions, and claims that the network had cut pay. And she believed it, because she had no access to the truth. Because she trusted, and so she lived in an RV, calculating every penny, all the while unaware that the millions were not gone but redirected. Not lost, but hoarded. And Christine, too, recounted the darkest time, when Ysabel's surgery required over $50,000, when Cody insisted the family could not access savings, that everything was tied up in Coyote Pass, and told her to sell, to fundraise, to ask for donations, even as money was allegedly streaming into Dabsark. And this is why the betrayal burned so fiercely, because it was not only financial but emotional. It was gaslighting on the deepest scale, convincing wives and children they were impoverished when in truth they were excluded, convincing them their sacrifices were noble when in truth they were unnecessary, convincing them to carry burdens whilst watching others live in comfort. And though some defenders may argue still that Cody was simply protecting the family's interests, that corporate structures are complicated, the facts as they appear in documents and testimonies suggest otherwise. They suggest precision, they suggest design, they suggest that from the very beginning the intent was to elevate a select few and diminish the rest. And that revelation once seen cannot be unseen. And that revelation once seen cannot be unseen. The foundation of their lives, as it was presented to the outside world and as it was experienced in the private, unseen rooms of their homes, had always been built upon a shared history, a web of intertwined loyalties, and an unspoken covenant of trust that no matter what else happened, the man at the center of it all would not financially destroy them. And yet that very assumption of safety was the first illusion to crumble, not with a sudden and thunderous bang that split the household in two, but with a whisper, an almost casual discovery that seemed so innocuous at first that it could easily have been ignored. And yet it marked the beginning of what many would later regard as one of the most extraordinary domestic betrayals to ever emerge from the shadows of so-called reality television. And according to those who were there, The first fissure in what insiders now call the Dabzark conspiracy came from an unlikely and almost ironic place. None other than Mary Brown herself, who by the age of 21 had already grown emotionally distant from Cody, yet remained deeply and almost inextricably entangled with him financially. For though she ran her own businesses, a flourishing LuLaRoe venture and her quaint little bed and breakfast nestled in Utah, both of which gave her an independence that was as empowering as it was symbolic, she nonetheless continued to pay into the collective family fund, contributing to the so-called pot that was meant to support all of them and ensure that everyone had a fair stake in the family's larger financial vision, particularly in relation to the long-promised and heavily discussed land at Coyote Pass. And what triggered the entire unraveling, as sources close to production recall with near disbelief, was nothing more than a tax document, a single piece of mail, a sheet of paper in an envelope that was never meant to land in her hands. Yet by some twist of fate or clerical error, it did, and John, one of the crew members, described it quite bluntly as bull, insisting that the official explanation circulated on set was that it was nothing more than a mail mix-up, a total fluke, a bureaucratic hiccup. But the consequences of that fluke would ripple through the family like an earthquake, because the letter in question bore the name of a company that none of the wives had ever heard before, an entity with the strange and memorable title of Dabzark. And though to Mary it seemed like meaningless corporate jargon, just another one of Cody's schemes, or perhaps even junk mail that should have gone straight in the bin, the oddity of that name clung stubbornly to her memory, and in a moment of offhandedness she mentioned it to Janelle, perhaps over a casual conversation, perhaps while discussing the endless bills and accounts that had come to dominate so much of their lives, asking simply whether she had ever heard of Cody being involved with something called Dabzark. And whereas to Mary it was merely an odd curiosity, to Janelle, whose mind had long been attuned to numbers, accounts, and the hidden currents of financial flows, it was like the tolling of an alarm bell in the night. Because she knew, or at least believed she knew, every entity tied to their family finances, every company, every contract, every account, and the very fact that she had never encountered this name before was, in itself, damning, and so she began to investigate. A task that came naturally to her, and with only a few clicks through the Arizona State Business Registry, her unease crystallized into cold certainty, for there it was in stark black and white, Dabzark Entertainment LLC, established in 2018, with Cody Brown and Robin Brown listed as the managing members. And this discovery, which may have seemed at first a minor footnote, became the spark that lit a wildfire. For upon learning it, Janelle and Christine began to confer in secret, whispering behind closed doors, comparing fragments of information, piecing together scraps of data, until gradually a picture began to form that was entirely at odds with the story Cody had woven for them over the years. The narrative of constant financial struggle, of an always empty family pot, of sacrifices made for the collective good, a story that now looked thin, fragile, almost transparent in its dishonesty, and Janelle, drawing upon her background and her acumen, began to construct a model, a theoretical but highly plausible spreadsheet of what the family's income should have been based on known production schedules, approximate per-episode fees from the network, and the last shared contract she had personally reviewed. And as she added the numbers together and cross-referenced them with what had actually been dispersed to the wives, the discrepancy grew so large it was impossible to dismiss. Millions upon millions of dollars that should have existed within the family accounts but were nowhere to be seen. And still, while the numbers painted a damning picture, it was Christine who supplied the final piece of the puzzle that turned suspicions into undeniable certainty. For as she prepared to leave Cody and the family behind in 2021, disentangling her life from the tangled roots that had bound her for so many years, she was forced to undertake a full accounting of her own assets, particularly her investment in the shared family properties and specifically the contentious land at Coyote Pass. And when she approached Cody to demand her fair share, citing the six-figure sum she had personally put in from the sale of her Las Vegas home, she was met not with cooperation or even grudging acknowledgement, but with resistance, obfuscation, and what she perceived as a calculated attempt to deprive her of what was rightfully hers, for he insisted that her name appeared on only one parcel of the land, and offered her a buyout sum so insultingly low that it felt not merely dismissive but actively deceitful. And in that moment she realized, as she would later recount, that his aim was not merely to wound her emotionally in the midst of their collapsing marriage, but to rob her outright, and so she hired a forensic accountant. And it was through this professional lens that the truth emerged with devastating clarity. The money that had once flowed into the family's accounts had, from 2018 onwards, been steadily diverted to Dabzark, And with that revelation, the conspiracy, long hidden in shadows, was laid bare. And Christine's exit from the family, coupled with her legal battle to reclaim her portion of the equity, blew open what could no longer be dismissed as paranoia, giving Janelle and Mary the confirmation they needed that the betrayal was real, that the money was gone, and that the man they had built their lives around, the husband they had defended, the patriarch they had trusted, was the very one who had been digging the pit into which their fortune had vanished. And thus the stage was set for a confrontation the likes of which viewers could scarcely imagine, one that would soon spill from the private turmoil of their household into the public arena of the courts, for a legal war was about to be declared. And if part one of the unfolding saga had exposed the existence of the Dabzark conspiracy and traced the hidden trail of diverted millions, then part two, which many have come to call the reckoning, would carry audiences and insiders alike into the heart of the confrontation, the blockbuster lawsuit, the shocking testimonies, and the jaw-dropping nine-figure judgment that ultimately sought to deliver justice not merely for 3 wronged wives, but for the 13 children who, it was alleged, had been cut out of the legacy their family had promised them. And so, armed with Christine's forensic report and Janelle's meticulous analysis, the 3 original wives, Mary, Janelle, and Christine, resolved that they could no longer approach Cody as isolated voices only to be gaslighted, dismissed, or belittled, but had instead to form a united front. And so, on a chilly autumn afternoon in Flagstaff in late 2021, just before Christine's move to Utah was to be made public, she requested one final meeting, ostensibly another discussion about the divorce, but in truth an ambush. For when Cody and Robin arrived, expecting tears and farewells, what they found instead was a tribunal. And though production had allegedly been instructed not to film, some of the room microphones, either through error or design, remained live, and the transcript of what was captured has since circulated among those who worked behind the scenes. And what it reveals is chilling, for the confrontation did not begin with shouting or drama, but with Janelle's quiet, steady voice asking about Dabzark Entertainment, and in the silence that followed, as Cody stopped mid-stride and Robin visibly stiffened, the air grew heavy, and when Christine pressed further, laying out the numbers they had pieced together, Cody's composure shattered and he lashed out, accusing them of spying, of disloyalty, of failing to recognize that he was protecting the family, claiming the money was his to manage because they were irresponsible, even going so far as to insist that as the star of the show, the income belonged to him. And in that slip, from our money to my money, was the unspoken truth finally laid bare. And yet, if Cody's words stung, it was Robin's defense that proved unbearable. For she argued that the secrecy had been necessary to safeguard the youngest children, to ensure security for Solomon and Ariella, dismissing the struggles of the older children as irrelevant because they were, in her view, the lawsuit alleged that for years the Brown family had in effect operated as a de facto partnership with Cody Brown, assuming the role of managing partner, which meant, at least under the principles of equity and fairness recognized in both business and family law, that he bore a fiduciary responsibility to act in the best financial interests of all who were part of that partnership, namely his wives, who for decades had contributed not merely emotionally but also financially to the collective enterprise that sustained their sprawling household and television image. By secretly diverting the partnership's primary source of income into a private channel for his own personal enrichment, the claim argued he had committed a blatant breach of that duty, and the seriousness of such a breach could not be understated. For it was not a matter of minor mismanagement, but a calculated pattern of concealment and redirection, designed to impoverish those who trusted him most, his original wives and their children, while simultaneously enabling a lavish lifestyle for himself and Robin, his favored wife, under the facade of prudent stewardship. Further, the filing described fraudulent conveyance, asserting that Cody and Robin had intentionally shifted the family's primary assets, specifically the income from their lucrative reality television show, into a shell company, Dabzark Entertainment LLC, not for legitimate business structuring but for the deliberate purpose of hiding it from those to whom it rightly belonged, namely the other wives who had been told repeatedly that the family finances were stretched thin, that there was little money for mortgages, medical bills, or children's education, when in reality the funds were being siphoned off into a separate entity established without their knowledge or consent, an act which, if proven, amounted to a conspiracy not merely to control, but to defraud. And it was on this point that the plaintiffs built their claim of unjust enrichment, arguing persuasively that Cody and Robin had reaped the rewards of others' labor and sacrifice, enjoying luxury holidays, designer goods, and private investments at the expense of the rest of the family, who struggled to make ends meet, and therefore the court must compel them to disgorge those ill-gotten gains and restore them to the rightful claimants. Yet the most serious allegation, labeled civil conspiracy, asserted that Cody and Robin had actively colluded in creating the secret corporate structure, deliberately deceiving the family and the network alike, presenting a false image of shared sacrifice to the public, while in reality consolidating wealth and control behind closed doors. And this charge, supported by documents, signatures, and financial trails, elevated the case from a domestic dispute into what one legal analyst described as a corporate dissolution masquerading as a family quarrel. For what had once been presented to the world as a plural marriage was, in truth, the operation of a brand with Cody at its head, the wives functioning as essential employees, the children as both product and legacy, and the network contract as the revenue stream. And within that model, the wives could credibly claim the status of partners wrongfully displaced in a hostile takeover executed by Cody and Robin. Thus, the lawsuit sought two primary remedies: the immediate dissolution of Dabzark Entertainment LLC with its assets seized and redistributed, and the commissioning of a full forensic audit to trace every penny that had been funneled through the entity, with repayment ordered for all sums that had been diverted, a figure that initial filing suggested was at least $8 million, but which might, once fully calculated, be substantially higher. And when the matter came before the court in a tense 2-week trial held under sealed conditions, it unfolded less as a family therapy session than as a devastating corporate reckoning. For the plaintiff's legal team meticulously constructed their case, beginning with hours of program footage in which Cody, Mary, Janelle, and Christine each spoke on camera about the so-called family pot, the explicit understanding that all money went in together and was shared equally. Evidence that could not be dismissed as hearsay but stood as repeated. Deliberate declarations of partnership broadcast to millions of viewers. And from there, the accountants and lawyers drew a timeline showing how, beginning in 2018, payments from the network ceased flowing into the family's joint accounts and instead began landing in the newly created Dabzark account, managed solely by Cody and Robin, with the allowances to the other wives shrinking even as gross revenues from the show remained steady or increased. And while spreadsheets and bank statements provided the backbone of the case, the heart came from testimony. Janelle speaking calmly and firmly as she described her role as the family's budget keeper, the one who had long reconciled accounts, paid bills, and ensured solvency, only to discover that Cody had exploited her trust, telling her tales of scarcity she believed because she had always considered him honest in financial matters, a betrayal that cut more deeply than any marital rift. And then Christine, whose testimony brought the courtroom to tears, recounting the moment she asked Cody to release funds for Ysabel's critical spinal surgery, only to be told the family could not afford it. An assertion she accepted at the time with anguish and guilt, only to discover later that the Dabzark account, flush with hundreds of thousands of dollars, could have paid for the procedure 10 times over. And she described Cody's refusal not as mere miserliness but as cruelty, control exercised through calculated denial. And this juxtaposition of children suffering against parents' secret luxuries painted a damning portrait that no cross-examination could erase. When Cody and Robin finally took the stand, their defenses appeared hollow. Cody's lawyer attempting to argue that as patriarch and contract holder the income was his by right, a claim undermined by years of public declarations to the contrary, while Robin sought to plead ignorance, claiming she signed documents at Cody's request without understanding them, only for the plaintiffs to produce records bearing her signature authorizing large withdrawals and expenditures, including holidays, jewelry, and designer purchases, undermining her credibility and leaving the impression of complicity rather than naivety. And as the trial progressed, it became evident that the weight of evidence was overwhelmingly in favor of the plaintiffs, leading to a verdict described by analysts as a legal earthquake, in which the judge ruled decisively that a partnership had indeed existed, that Cody and Robin's actions were deceitful, unconscionable, and driven by greed,